Welcome to Cook Once and Eat for a Week. This was actually inspired by a Valerie Bertinelli video. Now, what she was doing was a lot smaller batch than I am. Well, it was only her and her husband, so that makes sense. So here you can see I have picked up some San Marzano tomatoes. I have some basil. I have some olive oil. And I have a big old bag of garlic. I got this from Costco. Absolutely love it. It's a USA product, and I'm not saying buy USA. I'm just saying I've seen some documentaries about what happens in places like China when they produce garlic, and it would turn your stomach. So buy USA. The first thing you see me doing here is using the garlic press and going through and pressing out the garlic. Now I'm doing about 5 cloves of garlic, maybe 6, I honestly can't remember, for each can of San Marzano tomatoes because it's a big batch. Now if you don't like garlic, of course you can cut back on this, but I like the taste of garlic, so why not? When you get your pan ready, and you put your oil in your pan and you heat it up and you dump the garlic in, the garlic is almost ready within 30 seconds to a minute. Anything longer than that, the garlic's going to burn. So I wanted to have the garlic ready so it could be all dumped in at one time and there would be no waiting. So it'll be dumped in, switched around in the olive oil for a little bit. And then I would start in by putting in the tomatoes after that, and everything would be good. So it's about 20 cloves of garlic, maybe 24, and it will take me a few minutes to get through this. As we finish this, we're going to start on the tomatoes. I guess I should tell you the reason I'm struggling so bad is because I put the garlic in the freezer. I didn't want it to go bad, and of course I didn't defrost it before trying to use it through the garlic press. But anyway, after this, you're going to see a blender. I have a Vitamixer, and I put 2 cans of the San Marzano tomatoes in that Vitamixer. Now those tomatoes are whole, and I am blending them down. I'm just trying to save you from having to watch every little single solitary bit of it. Once you blend them down, you can go ahead and get them in your pan and get them ready. Now that Vitamixer should be coming up in a moment. Here we go. And as you can see, a couple of things of tomatoes are already in it. And I'm getting ready to blend it down. Now, once this is blended down, I'm going to go ahead and put about a tablespoon of olive oil within my pan, heat it up, throw my garlic in, and then throw my tomatoes on top of that. So it's being blended down and I'm really pureeing it. If you have a Vitamixer or a Ninja, you'll know what I mean. It's pretty high power, and you can get through things pretty quick. One thing you're not going to see is I started to blend the second couple of cans. Well, I blended 1 can, and I went ahead and threw the other can straight into the sauce without blending it, which was an error. I honestly thought about redoing this, but I wanted you to see that it's okay to make errors, as long as you can recover from them. Nobody's in your kitchen watching you. So I threw in a couple of tablespoons of olive oil, and what I'm doing here is I'm just waiting for it to heat up because you really don't want to put the garlic in until the oil is hot. Now, one thing about garlic, as far as a rule of thumb, you don't want to leave it in there too long. It can burn, and if it burns, it's going to taste awful. You want to toss it in, mix it around, and once you start smelling that garlic smell, it's done. It's ready to move on. So that's what you'll see me do here. I'll put the garlic in. I'll mix it around for a little bit, but once I smell it, then I immediately go ahead and put my sauce on top of that. Now, is that a lot of olive oil? Probably, but it just adds to the sauce. I like it. If you don't want to put that much in, don't. I will put down this recipe in the description so you won't have to worry about writing these down. Here's the garlic going in, and I'm mixing it around. And once it's mixed around, I'm going to go ahead and dump the sauces in there. It'll just take a second. And here comes the sauce. Now the sauce is not done by any means. And there you go. See how I just threw the can in there and I realized, oh man, I screwed up. So I'm just fishing out the tomatoes and putting them back in the blender, blending them down, and I'll reintroduce them. Now, did I get all of them? I think there was one or two, but they happened to show up with the shashuka I made, so it actually worked out. So blend those down, and when they're blended, go ahead and introduce them into the sauce. And then we're ready to move on to our next item. The next thing you're going to see me do is put in some tomato paste. Now, I use this great product out of a tube. It's wonderful. You can keep it in your fridge and you don't have to waste any. Now, should you put tomato paste in a marinara sauce? I'm not Italian. I honestly am not sure. But it just felt like it needed a little thickening up. So I'm trying to put in a tablespoon, possibly 2 of the tomato sauce, or tomato paste, I should say, and go ahead and mix this in within my sauce. Now, I'm going to let my sauce continue to cook, but of course, before it goes into the freezer and all these different meals, I'm going to have to cool it down. Yeah, you don't want to put hot food within your freezer. It just never works out very well. So there's the tomato paste. And as you can see, the consistency of the sauce is really nice. Now I can tell you when I made this, I should actually have made 5 cans worth, but the 4 worked out. I'll do 5 next time. So we're going to continue to cook this for a while. It's on medium. I'm not sure. Okay, as the sauce continues to cook, we are going to make us some meatballs. Now, the meatballs, I use a pound of beef, a pound of veal, and a pound of pork. Now, I realize your budget may not allow you to do 3 meats, and that's okay. If you can do 2, do beef and pork. If you can just do beef, that's okay too. As far as the poundage, do 3 pounds. It will give you quite a bit. You see me put the meats in, and what this winds up being is 2 eggs, a cup of panko, a cup of ricotta cheese, and I toss in a good handful of Italian seasoning. I'd say about 2 tablespoons worth, maybe 3. And what you do when you mix it together, you want to make sure you don't get overly nuts with the mixing, because too much mixing can actually make a tough meatball, believe it or not. So you saw me do the eggs, you're going to see the panko and the ricotta, and then you'll see me mix it all together. Now, once I'm done all this, I will get my pan ready, and I like to cook it on the stove, browning the meatballs on both sides before I put them in the oven. And I believe I told you, or maybe I hadn't, that I made an error here. One thing you want to do when you get your meatballs ready is you want to get a little sample and cook it up on your stove and see what it tastes like and see what you may be missing. I forgot to do this here, so it wound up being a little late in the game, but I still tasted it and saw that I just needed some salt and pepper. Everything else tasted good. So here's the mixing, and I believe you're going to see me put in a little more ricotta. It was just a little too dry feeling, so I thought a little bit more was needed. And of course, if it were too wet, I put a little more panko. And I'll go ahead and mix that in. And then you'll see me come back with the Italian seasoning and add that in. And of course, then comes the meatball bonanza as far as creating as many as you can. And these meatballs went over great with my family. They ate so many of them, I wound up having to make more. So there's the Italian seasoning. And now will come the pan. I'll spray it a little bit with some Pam. I don't really want to put oil in it because pork can release some oil in itself. Of course, I use lean beef, but if you're using 80/20, of course, that's going to create its own grease, so you don't have to worry about it. So there's my pan, some spray, and then I go ahead and start forming the meatballs. And as I do a few, you're going to then see me notice, whoops, I really should have made one and tasted it. And then I'll go over to my stove with a little patty, cook it on both sides, and give it a taste. This actually worked out wonderfully. I wound up with 2 whole pans of meatballs, and I had enough meatballs for meatball sandwiches, and then, of course, using other meatballs to include within a spaghetti. So there's the pan, and I'm setting it up to test it to make sure everything tastes good before I can. As you can see, I'm cooking the patty. Once the patty is cooked on both sides, I'll go ahead and taste it. And I believe I mentioned already that my meatballs needed a little bit of salt. Now, once this is done, I'm going to go ahead and finish putting my meatballs together. Now, the meatballs themselves gave me 2 big old 12-inch pans of meatballs, and you won't see that in the video here. What I did was, of course, sprayed it down, created the meatballs, browned them on both sides. Now, when this was done, I took the meatballs out, put them in a 9x13 pan, or baking pan, covered them with some sauce, and put them in the oven at 350 for about a half hour. You don't have to put a lot of sauce in. Basically, you want to put enough in so it doesn't dry out. And once they're done, of course, you're going to want to let them cool down before you go through and put them in your freezer. Doing the meatballs like this worked out very well for me. In fact, that when I pulled stuff out, I didn't have to get too crazy about cooking things because they were already cooked. All I had to do was warm stuff up once it got defrosted. Now you're going to see this come over to the oven. And this is where, of course, I'm browning it on both sides. Now, what you're not, like I mentioned, you're not going to see me go through the whole process here. And then I do 2 full pans. Now, once this is done, and I put them in those 9x13 pans, you can only see me do 1x913 pan. Here's the sauce, and the reason I'm bringing the sauce up is the last ingredient, basil. I put the basil in last. Basil is a bit of a delicate herb. If you put it in too soon and you cook it for a long period of time, it's going to lose some of its potency, if you will. So I put it in toward the end, and then of course I'm just chopping it up. I'm not worried about it. I don't want to cut it too much because that can also bruise the basil and cause it to lose its intensity. So here's some more basil, and once that's done, you'll see me pull out the baking pan. Now, my kids might gripe about seeing pieces of green in the sauce, but they can't say it's veggies, they're herbs. Here's the 9x13 pan I was talking about, and I'm putting in these, I'm covering them with just enough of sauce. Next time when I make this, though, I'm going to make 5 cans of sauce so I can have some additional sauce and really sauce these meatballs down. But you really only need enough to cover them. That will be alright. And I have 2 pans of these, which worked out really well. I have a family of 4, 2 teenage boys, and yes, they can eat. And in some cases, I'll think, oh, they won't eat much, and then they'll be asking for seconds and thirds. So here's the sauce. And okay, now we've made meatballs for meatball subs. We have more meatballs to include with spaghetti and have spaghetti and meatballs. Now we're going to do penne alla vodka. That is a sauce for penne, a type of noodle. As you can see, it does include vodka. You don't have to get crazy. I believe I put 1/8 of a cup in here before I put like 1/4 of a cup. Now, as far as how much sauce do I have here? Well, after spreading sauce on both things of meatballs, I've taken out half of what remains, and that's in this bowl here. So we have a little vodka, and now we're including a little whipping cream. Now, the whipping cream was about 2/3 of a cup for me. You'll want to gauge it. I base it on the color. You don't want it to look like a marinara sauce, but then you don't want it shocking pink either. So you go ahead and I mixed it in, and as soon as it gave me the color I wanted, I went ahead and put it aside and let it cool off. This will go in a bag, and it'll be wonderful on top of some noodles. It doesn't have to be penne. You can put it over anything you want, truthfully. But that's the third meal here. Now the fourth meal we're going to do is shashuka. Shashuka is a North African, Middle Eastern dish. It's sometimes called a hangover dish, in which people might eat in the mornings after partying too hard. It's a really nice dish. It's done with the sauce. And then you drop eggs into the sauce. Now, I'll put a link to a recipe for shashuka so you can see the end results if you've never dealt with it before. Now, here's the remainder of the sauce, and part of shashuka has peppers in it. Some people like to just use the regular peppers, green peppers, red peppers, cut them up and include them. Of course, you'll have to cook them down. I like the taste of the roasted red peppers, and you can get them in a jar ready taken care of. Now, as far as the peppers here, I only put about the equivalent of 1 pepper. And when I went to make the shashuka, it was kind of a little too watery. I needed to include more peppers. So I would most definitely include more peppers. I don't use onions, although the recipe I'll show you does have onions. My husband hates onions. So that would also add to a chunkier sauce if you had onions in it. Now, once you do this, you're going to add some spices. Now, garlic is one of them, but the garlic's already included in the sauce, so we don't have to worry about it. What we'll do here is we'll add in about 1 tablespoon of cumin. And the cumin will come up in just a minute. After the cumin, we'll add in some paprika. And I believe that was 2 tablespoons of paprika. And then to top it off, there'll be some red pepper flakes. So what you'll do when this is all done, like I was saying, when it's defrosted, you'll put it in your 12-inch skillet. You'll make a well for each of the eggs. Now, if you use a 12-inch skillet, you can probably do about 8 eggs. And open 8 eggs into each one of the wells. Then have your oven set to 350. Well, actually have it warmed up ahead of time. Put the pan in for 8 to 10 minutes, just enough time for the eggs to cook. Then you take them out. Top them with some feta and some basil and serve it with some bread, and it's really a very delicious dish. So, as you see me put the remainder spices here, I want to thank you for joining me with this video. I do enjoy our time together. And if you like what you see here, feel free to give me a thumbs up or a comment if you wish. And if you like these videos that I'm doing, feel free to subscribe to the channel. I wish I could do them a little quicker, than I have been. I will try to get better. But my goal is to come up with more recipes with more freezer meals because, let's face it, folks, freezer meals are wonderful. It's absolutely great to go to your freezer, pull something out, stick it out, let it defrost. Then when you come home for a long day's work, you're ready to go. So once again, thank you for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.